Okay, so this is an argument that we should move or consider moving the mast backwards towards the rear of the board. Currently, we run it as far forward as possible. Having as far forward as possible has the advantage of lowering the risk of hitting the water when the board is being pumped and angled downwards because the front of the board is shorter. But as we've discussed, we should really be minimizing the downward angles anyways. So maybe that's less of a concern if we were to do things right. So here's the argument for why those of us who tend to push the nose down too far in the down pump, i.e. Kevin and Chi, would benefit from moving the mast backwards a bit. Here's a near photo perfect image of our foil. Now imagine that there's an imaginary line A here, and this line is where the balance point is. Um, it's this conceptually where if all the weight of the foil were in front and in back equally for the foil and riders combined, if that was perfectly balanced, then the foil would fly level. Uh, I have happened to draw this right through the middle of the front wing, but that's a bit of a coincidence. It's probably closer to the back of the front wing or somewhere around there, but not necessarily straight right through the middle. But still, that's not overly critical to this particular argument. Now, if the mass were far forward, then you can imagine that the center of gravity of the foil is slightly to the tail of the board, like here. Um, and in fact, this is where I measured where the center of gravity of my foil actually is. It is slightly behind the balance point. So if that's where the foil center of gravity is, that means it's going to, by default, tilt backwards. Therefore, to balance that out, then the rider's weight needs to be slightly forward in front of the balance point. Since, since we know that the foil needs to be slightly tilted downwards in order to glide forward and downwards, it may even need to be even more slightly forward in front of the balance point. Now, if the center of gravity of the rider is in front of this balance point, and if the rider is balanced on the front and back foot, then conceptually, the rider's back foot, C1, and the front foot, C2, equidistance between their center point is actually not equal in front of the balance point. And in fact, the front foot is significantly further away from the balance point than the back foot. The distance between A to C2 is greater than A to C1. Now, this is important because when you go and you pump, if you were to put equal pressure on both feet and the front foot is further in front of the balance point than the back foot is from the balance point, then you get a lot more mechanical advantage. You got a lot more leverage in the front foot, and it pitches the nose down a lot more. This is sort of the soft feeling that I get when I push down equally and my front foot is too far forward. But it is encouraged to be forward because the center weight, the center of gravity of the foil is a little bit backwards, and I'm trying to get a little bit forward on the board at the same time. Either way, it means that when we're counteracting all of this, we end up putting more weight further forward. Now, we try to counteract that, and we've been talking about getting our feet more narrow, bringing it back so that when you push down, you don't actually over push the front. Now, in order to bring that front foot backwards and keep your center of gravity forward, you got to bring your back foot forward, in which case you get a more and more narrow stance, in which case you introduce balance troubles. So then we might consider that if we brought the center of gravity of the foil in line with a balance point, then we wouldn't have as big of an imbalance. Another way to think about this, to understand it, is to imagine things in extreme. Imagine that we have a super long board, and so the center of gravity of the board is significantly more forward than the balance point. So if this were the board and the foil center of gravity were way out here, then you can imagine that the rider position has to be way back here. And then your back and your front foot are even far behind the balance point, just to balance out that center of gravity of foil position. If we're way back here, you can imagine when you put pressure down and you try to pump, then you would be stalling the wing because you would keep on pumping back here, but you needed to get your weight back here in order to counteract the balance point up here. So what could we do? If you imagine that our foil was here, if we were to move the foil back slightly, so if we were to shift this mass back a little bit, then this would take the center of gravity of the board and move that forward a bit, in which case that would let us move our center of gravity of the rider from here being forward to the balance point to more in line with the balance point. And then that means the feet are not as separated from the balance point. And when we pump down, we won't have as much over leverage on the front foot.